Child meat. I'm a 28-year-old male, and I have 3 younger brothers who I feel very protective of, even into adulthood because of this. Let's get into it. We were all in elementary school, and we would often play by in the park behind our house or in the front yard with a neighbor family. They couldn't play with us that day, so we were by ourselves in the front yard. It must have been late afternoon or dusk. We were messing around in front of the porch when suddenly a beat-up old-ass light-colored pickup out of nowhere rolls up in front of our house and parks on the sidewalk in front of our lawn. We are kind of shocked because this truck appeared to so suddenly, so we stop playing and watch what's going to happen. The man, dressed in a lumberjack, wearing some kind of flannel or check shirt, gets out and walks out onto our lawn, making a beeline straight for my brothers and me. He slows pace and is smiling as he approaches us, but doesn't stop and ask, "Is your mom and dad home yet?" with a sinister grin, ear to ear. This is when everything became slow motion. I looked at my brothers, who all had gathered behind me out of fear. I said to them, "Everyone get inside," and they ran to the front door as fast as they could. The man asked again if my parents were home, as I too am going forward towards the door. "Yes," I shout as I back into the house and start to close the door, locking every lock, as he tells me through the screen door they're selling meat from the truck, and they want us to come look. I get a glimpse of a rusty meat locker with a padlock on it in the bed of the truck, and a woman in the passenger seat staring at this whole situation before I close the main front door and get the deadbolt locked. The man moves away from the door itself and starts peering through our bay window. One of my younger brothers yells, "Dad, there's someone here!" Our dad was at work still though. We all run upstairs to where our mom is peeing in the master bedroom and has no idea what's been happening. We tell her everything and she jumps off the toilet frantically and makes herself decent, all the while panicking, saying, "Where are my babies?" She goes downstairs and pulls the front door open, asking, "What the hell are you doing? Get away from my children!" He repeats the line about selling meat, and our mom less than politely declines and slams the door in his face and calls her dad. He gets in the truck as fast as he got out and peels out as he tries to get out of the neighborhood. They did not go to any other houses trying to sell their wares. They only spoke to our family and indeed to us minors. Our mom says she thinks he was planning to make us look in the meat locker, push us in, and take us away. I don't know what would have happened if that were true. One of my younger brothers was troubled with nightmares of being kidnapped up until his teenage years because of this unhappy experience. Weird child and meat salesman. Let's not meet. Legg Liquor Man, my first post on Let's Not Meet. I love reading everyone else's stories, so it's time to share mine, I guess. So, back in 2014, I was your average angsty teen, 17-year-old female, average build, blonde, and I was in Argos with my friend, and her baby. It was a summer day, and I was wearing shorts, and due to the fact I'm curvy, I wear tights to prevent chub rub, which is something all curvy girls understand. For those not from the UK, Argos is like a crappier version of IKEA. So we walked in talking about what we're gonna buy because me, the woman who came with my friend, was having another baby. As we walked into the store and started checking out the catalogs, a 6-foot-plus beer-smelling guy came up to us and introduced himself by shaking my hand and loudly saying, "My name's Rondas." We thought this was weird because he came over to us from the other side of the store. So we ignored him and he walked off back to where he was. As we walked to the queue, he tried saying something to us again, but he was mumbling and speaking a very different language, guessing Polish or Russian, and I watched him leave in my peripheral vision. Convinced he was gone, I relaxed and continued chatting. Now, bear in mind, I was in the midst of my rebellious stage and had several tattoos by this point, including bows on the back of my legs, mid-thigh, like where stockings would be. Next thing I'm aware of is a wet sensation on the back of my leg. I turn around, looking down to see this weirdo getting back up and walking away after licking my tattoo. I froze in shock as this guy walked away after licking my leg for a solid 15 to 20 seconds. The store assistant called the police for me, and I called my boyfriend in hysterics. The police came by my house the next day to speak to me. and they also asked if it was possible for a DNA sample. They wanted to swab my leg, but I already showered. Luckily, my tights and shorts were still on the floor from where I threw them, and when I took them off upon arrival at my home, so I gave my tights to the police, and about a week later, I heard back from them that the man had been arrested for licking the legs of several other women, given 6 months jail time and community service. In summary, Rondes, let's never meet again, cause I am a stronger, braver person now, and if you try messing with me again, your head is gonna get stomped on. The Cross Man. This story occurred about 4 years ago when I was still in college. I just moved into an apartment with my then girlfriend, now fiancée Elise. I worked part-time while I focused on school and she worked full-time to support us. She worked in an office about 40 minutes away from our apartment, so I usually expected her home 40 minutes to an hour after I knew she had gone off of work. For some necessary context, we were vocal atheists back then. We're still unbelievers, but we keep it to ourselves these days. I was a bit of an edgy college student phase, so I felt like everybody needed to know my opinions on the existence of deities. My zeal bled into Elise, who, though less vocal than I am, approved a bumper sticker of our shared car. It was nothing offensive or rude, just funny. It was the word Darwin spelled out in the shape of Jesus fish. Sure, it poked a little fun, but I never felt it was unnecessarily provocative or anything like that. Anyways, one day in particular, I finished up with school and work for the day and was planning on meeting Elise at the grocery store to pick up some things on her way home from work. I was waiting for her to call me to let me know when she was close so we could arrive at the same time. Right on time, Elise called me, but the content of the conversation was a surprise. She said that on her way home, a man had pulled up next to her at a red light and began berating her for that bumper sticker. "What's your problem? Do you hate God?" he said. She rolled her window up and ignored him. She figured he had said his piece and would move on, but no, he continued to follow next to her, graduating from prodding about her theological beliefs or lack thereof to insulting her looks and intelligence. "You little slut, is that how you justify taking every dick that comes near you? God isn't watching, so why not? Fuck you. Too stupid to surrender to Christ, dumb fucking slut. You know anything, I'll teach you the Bible, that's for sure." At this point, she got scared. He began following her for over 3 miles now, and she was getting close to the grocery store. In the midst of all of this, she forgot to call me to let me know how to head to the store to meet her. When she did call, she was almost in tears. She explained the situation, and that she was about to pull into the store and was worried he'd follow her inside. I jumped up and got in my beater, speeding to the store. When I got there, she was parked in the lot with a large, mid-50s man standing next to the driver's door, finger pressed against the glass, demanding her to let him in so he could take part in her hedonism. "If you're fucking every dick you come near, why not me?" he yelled at her. "Come on, you little slut, you know you want it." He started banging on the window. I didn't even turn my car off before running out of it and towards her car. She was sitting in her locked car sobbing in fear when I grabbed the guy's shoulder, spun him around, and asked him what the fuck his problem was. He gave me a shove on the shoulder and told me to mind my own business. I'm not big or scary, but I did grow up with an older brother who was significantly bigger than me. Plus, I went to public schools in a not-so-great area. I'm relatively proficient at defending myself. I told him she was my business, and if he didn't back the fuck off and go home, his day was gonna get very bad. I was inches away from his face at this point, finger planted in his chest. I was terrified. Anger as I was, I had no idea how in the world I was gonna take this guy. He looked like a Vietnam vet based on his tattoos, and he had a pretty stable build. He was by no means a powerless old man. Eventually, I threatened to call the cops on him, and that seemed to ward him off. He walked to his car, still screaming about what a slutty bitch my girl was, and I should keep my bitch on a leash, which I'm pretty sure is a stolen line from the 40-year-old virgin. We waited for his car to leave the parking lot, and I got in the car with Elise to calm her down and let her know nothing would happen to her while I was around. We did our shopping and moved on. Since we took separate cars, that meant we had to drive home separately. I drove behind Elise to make sure she wasn't being tailed. As we were about to turn into the entrance of our apartment complex, I see a shitty van a few cars behind me. Fuck, I think to myself. I call Elise and tell her to circle the block until I tell her otherwise and she agrees. I decide that if he followed me into our complex, I'd call the cops. Well, he did just that. I pulled into an area far away from our building, so he couldn't know which was ours. I parked into a parking space, dialed 911, explained the situation, stupidly, got out of the car to confront him. The combination of the vile things he said to such a sweet and wholesome girl, plus his persistence in pursuing us, had me ready to hurt him. Only this time, he wouldn't get out of the car. In a weird, twisted role reversal, he was locking himself in his car, and I was outside screaming at him. He gestured towards his phone, which showed a phone call screen and the phone number 911. I was so confused but relieved that they were coming, even though I'd already called them. After this, I sat in my car and waited. When the cops arrived, they asked that I call Elise to have her meet us so she could give her side of the story. We all said our piece, and when the cops looked up this old fucker's information, they immediately placed him in handcuffs. He was known for harassing school-age girls and had done time years before for raping his ex-wife. As the police were taking him away, he began screaming hysterically. He kept repeating the same phrase over and over. "You can't do this. I'm the fucking cross man. God gave me the cross. I hold the cross." It was so bizarre, manic almost. Once they took him away, they let us know that he called them to report our bumper sticker. He thought it was illegal to espouse atheist or otherwise non-Christian ideas in public. That got a laugh from me. We never heard anything more about him. And I'm not mad about it. Cross man, let's not meet again, you fucking creep. Garbage eating man on the bus. This literally happened today. I advise you to skip the story if you're too sensible to gross stuff or if you're eating right now. So, I'm a man. Yesterday was my birthday, just turned 24, which means I spent the weekend drinking my ass off. Friday on a club, Saturday on a bar, and yesterday at a friend's house. So, you can imagine the mess I was in this particular Monday morning. I had to take 2 buses to get to work, and the whole stop and all the time then they do that made me sick even in a non-hangover day. I considered going by car to avoid this, but then thought, fuck it. I've been here before. Could as well save the gas money and suck it up to sickness for the hour I spent riding the buses. Big mistake. I got on the bus and immediately felt sicker, but again, not my first time. And I decided to focus my attention on the other bus riders to get my mind off the bad feeling. Bigger mistake. At first I didn't notice anything weird about this man, about 50 to 60 years old, but then he suddenly got up and changed seats for no particular reason. And I could tell he was probably homeless because his clothes were very dirty. Okay, no big deal. Got nothing against the homeless, right? Then he started rubbing his finger against the filthy bus floor and licking them. He smiled as he did this, and I noticed he had few to no teeth. The scene combined with my hangover made me extremely unwell. I thought it couldn't get worse, but then he got up again and started picking whatever tiny pieces of dirt and garbage were on the bus floor and putting them in his mouth. He then got to the back of the bus and started manically laughing, which honestly creeped me the fuck out. I then decided to close my eyes to avoid seeing whatever he was going to put in his mouth next, but I had to open my eyes occasionally so I didn't miss my stop. When I saw the spot before mine, I got up, and so did he. As expected, his smell was putrid, and I had to fight my urge to vomit when he was standing next to me. I avoided looking at him, and when the bus finally stopped and the doors opened, he went on the bus's garbage and started licking empty wrappers and plastic cups of coffee amongst other stuff. I couldn't contain myself any longer, and as I stepped out of the bus, I puked on the stairs. I didn't go like full Blastoise, so it was just one skirt. The rest, as you can imagine, I swallowed. I then looked at him and he was smiling. As I stepped out of the bus, the man got down on the bus and started to enthusiastically lick my vomit. He was rubbing his hands against it, licking his fingers and still smiling. I watched for must have been the longest second of my life. My stop is located in front of a mall, in which I got in running as fast as I could, and proceeded to spend the next half hour vomiting in the bathroom, only stopping once to call my boss to inform her I would be late. I know that man was probably mentally ill. I do feel sorry for him. and expect that somebody got him the help he needs after seeing what he did today. But I don't want to ever see anybody even resembling him in my life again. It's like he appeared precisely in the day in which I was less able to deal with this kind of stuff, and the image of him licking my vomit of a bus's floor is forever stuck in my mind. Paper bag masked man. So, this happened fairly recently, a few weeks into my first job. I believe so. That'd be around August of 2017. I was heavily asleep that morning when I woke up to the sound of my dad panicking and shouting. When I got up, he nervously told us that our house got broken into. We saw that our front gate, we live in a place wherein it's normal for houses to have tall gates, was still locked, but our front house was wide open. Our front door has 3 locks, one that requires a key, and 2 controls to keep the door locked in case the key lock gets opened. These 2 are one heavy-duty bolt lock that can't be opened by keys, and one chain lock that stops the door. On that unfortunate night, however, we forgot to bolt lock the door. Upon checking the house, we saw that nothing was really stolen, except for my dad and little brother's iPhones. We found this really weird, because he had MacBooks, cameras, and other expensive gadgets lying around in the living room at the time. After this, we went on to check our CCTV footage. Since my family sleep fairly early, 10 p.m. on average, we knew that there was a lot of ground to cover from that time all the way to when we actually woke up. And as we're playing the recordings from that night, we saw that my older brother got home at around 1:15 a.m., which is also normal since he's a law student and studies in coffee shops till late at night. Around 10 minutes later, we saw a motorcycle pull up near our gate, and one guy wearing a paper bag on his head climbed our fence. This guy didn't look too scary, and he seemed very thin, and maybe that's why the first thing he did was walk around outside our house to peep into my older brother's window to see if he's asleep. My brother is 6'2", 240 pounds, so he's huge. After peeking through his window, this guy slowly walked to the front door and picked the lock. When he opened the door, the chain lock I told you about earlier blocked his way, and he brought out a big-ass pair of what seemed like chain cutters to cut it down. Once inside our house, all the gadgets in the living room were right there in front of him, but he swiftly made his way to the control box of our CCTV and unplugged it. Luckily, there are 2 sets of cameras, and he didn't get to unplug the other one anymore. With this, he continued to walk straight to my dad and little brother's room, and spent a few minutes there. After a few minutes, we saw the guy briskly walking out of the room while holding a knife. Being in a rush to go out, he accidentally knocked a chair over, and also dropped the knife upon impact. He got up and rushed out without even picking up anything and closing the door. This stunned us. We didn't know what could have happened, and what they had in mind that they had a knife. After watching all of this, we decided to sit down as a family and discuss what had just happened. Apparently, when the guy hurried out of my dad's room, my dad remembers hearing our cat growl really hard. Maybe that scared the guy. Dad didn't bother to get up because our cat does that a lot whenever there are house bugs or whatever at nighttime. And when we talked, my older brother said he felt uneasy that night, and when he was about to sleep, he felt like he was being watched, which has proven to be true because of the footage we had. Further, we believe that it was premeditated, and they had a specific goal, and they had been spying on us for a while now. I mean, they knew what time my brother gets home usually. They also know exactly where my dad's room was. They also knew where the CCTV control box is. They also happened to know that that night was the only night we let our 4 German Shepherds sleep in their cages at the far end of our backyard, which is when they usually sleep free and set loose in the front yard by the front door. It just seemed like they knew too much in general. We have 2 guesses as to who this could have been, but we just couldn't figure it out completely. 1, it could have been a former maid we had, and which we had fired because we caught her and her husband stealing stuff at home. Explains how they knew where everything was located. 2, it could have been these 2 guys my little brother and I had got into an altercation with in a sketchy cell phone repair store. These 2 guys we had an altercation with were tough guys. They agreed to fix my brother's phone for a certain price, and we had a deal to get it done by a certain date. What happened was they accidentally broke my brother's phone while trying to fix it, and wanted my brother to still pay for the parts. Being a defensive brother, I knew I had to step up. We got into like a heated argument, and we're saying things like, blah blah blah, fuck you, and stuff like that. So, maybe it could have been them. Anyways, when we contacted the police and gave our statements, they weren't really of much help. We did, however, get better security measures at home, and also after that, nothing ever happened anymore, so at least we have that. But to this day, the image of the man with a paper bag mask looking straight into the CCTV camera still gives me chills. So, to the paper bag masked man who broke into our house with a knife, let's not meet again, ever. The man who meowed. It was past 1 a.m. and my 3 female friends and I were walking back to our dorm after having a late supper. The route back was a long stretch of pavement right beside a 2-way road. It was dark and quiet, with hardly any cars going by. A cab then drove up from behind and pulled up by the pavement, right next to us. The driver rolled down his window and we heard a meow. One that sounded exactly like a cat. Thinking that the driver was probably asking if we wanted a ride, we shook him off and continued walking forward. We asked one another if we had heard a meow, thought it was strange, but brushed it off, concluding that it was probably a cat in his back seat. The cab stayed at where it was. As we walked on, 10 to 15 seconds later, we heard the sounds of a wiring engine coming from behind. The cab accelerated to where we were and again pulled up beside us, and again the driver rolled down his window, this time his head sticking out, looked at us and went, meow. He had a manic grin on his face. Holy shit, we ran as fast as we could, and the pavement being a long and straight one, there was no turn we could make to somewhere safer. Neither could we turn back, as we did not want to pass by the lunatic in his cab. While we were running, his cab sped up from behind, but this time, he didn't stop beside us. He sped off and went off much to our relief, but not for long. About 100 meters ahead, he abruptly made a U-turn. Now the cab was in the opposite direction, driving towards us. We completely freaked out, thinking he's coming to get us for real this time. The cab went by us and didn't stop, though we were certain he was gonna make a U-turn behind us and repeat what he did. We ran the fastest we could and never looked back, thankfully reaching our dorm before we could have another encounter with him. Sandwich Man. I am from a small town near the beach. With that being said, I have seen some shit. All the crazies live at the beach, I would know. Being a woman, I am greeted with a lot of creepy men in general, but there was one encounter that stood above the rest. I worked at a plaza in a commercial art gallery as the gallery director at the age of 18. The owners of the gallery owned the whole strip and were friends with my father, how I got the job. They had just opened the gallery and were reluctant to spend any money on anything. The fakest fight I had with them, because the budget for shows was about installing security cameras for the safety of the artwork and myself. They just did not think it was necessary at the moment and slid it to the back burner. Everyone that had a business in the strip bought food from a man who used to own a catering business and sold sandwiches, drinks, homemade cookies from a giant cooler out his truck. Let's just call him Bob, the Sandwich Man. I ordered from him every other day, the same thing. We would have a good conversation every time, but the more he came, the longer he stayed to talk to me. After a few weeks he came in to look at the art. He started looking up around the walls and into the corners for what I now know, cameras. He then proclaimed, "There's no cameras in here. This is crazy for an art gallery." "Yeah, I know, right?" I replied stupidly. "But hey, at least I get paid a little." That comment started the conversation I will never forget. "How would you like to make $1,000 US in 2 hours? He then started to explain to me the other business he was in, the cam business. He then started telling me that I'll be working for him, and he would just get a cut. Just a small cut. I could keep the rest. I would have my own phone, and all I would have to do is take my clothes off if I wanted more money, and I could just, fuck myself in front of the camera. He's just going on and on about it, and I'm just sitting there staring blankly at him with no idea what to say back. He then started to suggest screen names for me, and the one that stood out the most was Finger Bangers 18, since I was 18 years old at the time. He then told me that there there is like a trial period in which he would have to test me out before he sends me to his clients. I do not remember how I ended the conversation, but I know I was no rude in fear of the fact that he knew there were no cameras. He left and I just sat there trying to process everything that just happened. He had my number for sandwich purposes, and he started texting me every night for 2 weeks, offering me $1,000 US, and the more I declined, the higher the offer got. One day, he offered me $10,000 US for me to send naked pictures. He would not stop. I called my boss immediately, and she did not believe me. I could not prove it since there were no cameras, so I threatened to quit if she didn't do anything about it. I then forwarded her all the messages, so she made me text him, not her, to not come back to the plaza because he was not welcome anymore. So, long story short, if I would have accepted his offer, my screen name would not be Fingerbangers18. It would probably be Pussy Sandwich. The Titty Man and me at 16. To preface this, I'm a 35-year-old woman, and I worked at 3 different answering services from age 16 through my mid-20s. I hope this is okay here. It involved me just over 20 years ago. The Titty Man, bondsman, and the sheriff's deputies, forgive formatting. I'm on mobile. I got my first job as an answering machine service when I was 16, and I loved it. We answered for about 200 businesses, and there was quite a mix. Same old every day, but different too. I was the baby of the office, so I was usually not alone, and my coworkers protected me from the usual office debauchery, read drugs, sex, booze, but someone forgot to mention the Titty Man to me. So this came as a bit of a shock that he did what he did. I've been working there for a few weeks, and I was alone on a Sunday night, answering calls here and there and being bored. The line for a visiting nurse company lights up. I answer, to be greeted with a collect call from the local county jail. I accept the call, thinking that someone might have an elderly patient they can't reach and need a well check or to schedule extra visits because they got locked up. Nope. I'm greeted with, how big's your tits? I promptly hung up. He called back several times, and I have to accept the calls in case it really is for the reasons listed above. I contact the on-call nurse. She tells me what I just told you about and how he does this from time to time. I then proceed to be harassed for about half an hour when I get a brilliant idea. Of course, Titty Man calls back and I accept the call. I tell him I have to put him on hold sometimes so I can answer the phone, but I'll talk to him. He likes it. He starts asking questions, dirty ones, and I answer a few of them. Then put him on hold, grab the other headset and don it. Here's where law enforcement comes into play. I called the bondsman we all answered for and explained my situation. He grabbed his other phone and called his buddy inside the jail, relaying the situation. He's having trouble doing this because he's also listening to me talk dirty to this creep. I was very creative for Titty Man, and he ate it up. My bondsman was laughing so hard he was in tears. Since Titty Man was calling from inside the overcrowded jail, they couldn't pinpoint him just by being on a phone. Deputies began shutting down banks of phones, one at a time. When the call cut off mid-pervy spew, the officer checked who was on that bank. Lo and behold, there was Titty Man. He was in jail because he was surprised, making obscene and harassing phone calls. Who'd have thunk it? Deputies took him into custody with new charges, and he got another 18 months or so tacked on to his existing sentence. The idiot was fairly short to the door, too. My story doesn't end here, however. Several years later, I was working at another answering service, and he calls. Same company and everything. I informed the on-call nurse, and they ended up pressing charges on him again. I encountered this creep and his creepy yet hilarious antics at all 3 services for the same company. And different ones as well. It's been 20 years since I've encountered the Titty Man, who no longer do answering service work, but I have a few friends that still do, and the creep is still at it. I hope you get a kick out of my story.